Hello. Today I would like my speech to be about one of my favorite artists that I've been following for a long time. His name is Joe Rogan, and he's definitely more than an artist. He's one of those every guys who do a little bit of everything, and I definitely take a lot of inspiration from him with what I do, the way I try to better myself, better my life, and also work on my own art. Try to be myself a funny man like he might be known for. From some, others might know him just from, being the Fear Factor guy, UFC commentator, or from his brief acting career. We will get into that. So let me just start off with my PowerPoint. Here we are. So this is where I began with some general information. Joe Rogan was born August 11th, 67, Newark. He definitely, eventually moved to Boston, and a lot of his comedy and his style is based off of a Boston comedy style. Very harsh, very, very critical, and very good, too. A lot of great comedians came out of Boston. I wish I could name some now, but definitely not off the top of my head. And again, he's multifaceted. Like I said, he's done television, film, stand up. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, taekwondo. And of course, he's got like the most successful podcaster is out there. I've dabbled in podcasting. I've dabbled in stand-up comedy, and both probably were thanks to Joe Rogan. You can really get a lot from somebody like him if you decide to try to mimic him. At least if you're one of those guys who can't decide on one thing like me. I can never decide on one career path or one hobby or whatever it is. I try to do it all like Joe Rogan does. All right, on to the next slide. Whoops. Technical difficulties. Here we are. So a lot know him for his stand-up comedy. He's got a few specials on Netflix. Pardon me, I got a frog in my throat tonight. He let's see here. Right, he was inspired by Richard Pryor's live stand-up specials that he saw in person in theaters with his parents. His parents dragged him to the theater when he was younger. A lot of the smaller pieces of information, just by following him, listening to his podcast, even though his podcast probably should be considered the number one reference for this speech. That's where I learned a lot about him, the small, intricate things. Like, he did part of the reason why he decided to start doing stand-up was because at that age he was a martial art practitioner in taekwondo, and hey, why would you continue on a path where you're gonna get kicked in the head, or you're just gonna make people laugh? I think it's a no brain situation there, no brain decision anyways. He performed his first gig at an open mic in Boston, of course, in '88. By 1990 he had moved all the way to New York to do his stand-up full-time, and that's why Joe Rogan, even though he's kind of based out of LA as of recent, he kind of had that New York attitude when it comes to stand-up comedy, which is a little bit more harsh, maybe a little more critical, and maybe a little more refined too. That's a whole nother speech there, though. Let's see here. And of course, Rogan cites Richard Jeni, Lenny Bruce, Sam Kinison, and Bill Hicks as his comedy influences. And I think if you do the research, one or two of these guys are out of Boston. Everybody wants to be Kinison. Everybody who was, coming up around the time of Joe Rogan, he loves to recite a quote where he basically read it off the wall of a bathroom stall or something like that, where it just says, "Stop trying to be Kinison." I mean, it's fair, we get our inspirations from some people, and I don't know, I guess originality comes from borrowing a little bit from everybody, and then you kind of like try to create something from there. And Joe Rogan He's good at being original. Next slide. Let's see here. Part of his acting career was in '94 when he moved to LA, and he did his first national television spot on a half-hour comedy hour. He later landed his starring role in the Disney's television short-lived sitcom Hardball. He talks about that on his podcast a lot. It was basically an unsuccessful pilot that I don't think it even really made it to air. There might have just been a few commercials, or a few episodes rather. From 95 to 99, he did News Radio, which a lot of people might have actually seen. It was a pretty popular show around the time. Phil Hartman, Andy Dick were stars. Phil Hartman, a lot of people know him from voice acting and Simpsons, things like that. Great actor, great voice actor. Personally, I liked him in Jingle All the Way. If you don't know about Jingle All the Way, you must go watch it. Let's see here. In 2001, Rogan was offered a job hosting the American Fear Factor, which led to increased turnouts to his stand-up career and many additional TV roles. So when you're doing stand-up comedy, part of it is to do certain things like reality TV to kind of increase your reputation, to get more people out to your shows. So doing that show was pretty brilliant for him, because I'm sure it was easy for him. It didn't take too much time, too much energy, which of course he has a lot of. Another one of the inspiring traits of Joe Rogan. You have to have a lot of excess energy to be successful, to do the things you got to do. Let's see here. Next, we're going to touch on his the Ultimate Fighting Championship. If you like mixed martial arts, then you know Joe Rogan, because he's been the best commentator for the last 20 years. I actually 100% almost everything I know from jiu-jitsu is from listening to Joe Rogan's commentating, because he would do such a great job describing it, and every now and then he'd throw a joke in, so he'd really keep you entertained and keep you laughing when maybe you're watching something that might be considered boring, like grappling. The stand-up boxing and that's always great and fun to watch. But when dudes start grappling, it can get a little more technical. And if you don't know what's going on, it's going to just look like the guys are hugging. But Joe Rogan would describe it in such a way, it would actually educate you. So, I mean, thanks to him, I know what a rear naked choke is. Let's see here. Okay, so in the early 2000s, UFC was acquired by Zuffa, and Rogan was offered a job of color commentator. He had a little on and off relationship with them. Eventually, he came back on, and he was being paid in a trade. Basically, he said, "Just give me some good seats for my friends," and that paid off, because that gave him something to talk about on his podcast, which is hugely successful, and he has tons of stories about going to the UFC with his friends. And that basically leaves us with his podcast. Let me do a little live editing here. So, I shrunk the wrong one. So basically, on Joe Rogan's podcast, like I said before, most successful podcast currently. Here we go. And one of the most successful anyways. There's tons of them out there, but Joe Rogan has some of the biggest guys on the show. Just had Kanye West, which is like a podcast people have been waiting for a very long time. Finally, he had him on. He's had Elon Musk, tons of presidential candidates, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Rogan is one, two, you have to recognize him for success, for what he's done in all these different fields. Acting, comedy, martial arts, a real renaissance man, if you will. A guy's guy. People like to refer to him as the Oprah for men. And it might be, you know, and he has an impression where you might be like a bro or a Chad if you follow him, but he's really for everyone. You know, he interviews politicians, authors on the podcast, all that good stuff. And of course, I have a podcast slide. All that talking, and I should have been doing it with the podcast slide up. Basically, he started in 2009. Boy, it's been 11 years already. Who would have known? Around that time, I feel like certain radio, like listening to radio shows was lacking, and it basically left a void for him to fill. You know, Howard Stern was out there, but you had to pay to listen, and Joe Rogan has always been free and still is to this day. A year later, he was in the top 10 on iTunes. Now he's making $30 million a month. Now, are those numbers legit? I don't know. Probably. He just signed with Spotify. If you look at the Spotify stock, through the roof, right? Let's look at the numbers. There's a lot to consider. And of course, I got a few references here, and you can always listen to his podcast as the ultimate reference, because he talks about himself more than anything else. But what else are you going to talk about on the podcast? Anyways, I'd like to thank you for listening to my speech. Apologize for all the throat clearing, but I think this was another successful one. Have a great night. Stay safe. Brush your teeth. Pet your dog. And we're out.